Like everything else, leadership is a process of trial and error. And we come to the sixth secret of leadership, which is how to deal with the error. And this is aligned with the 7-word system sorry concept. The word sorry in the 7-word system is all about this. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to say sorry, but we have to avoid the need to say sorry. That's really the essence of the principle. But it is worth saying that it is not in any way appropriate to blame. If you find fault with one of your team, then that needs to be addressed, of course, but it does not need to be addressed in the sense of blameful attitude. That's totally counterproductive. If somebody's not done the job properly, it's your fault. You're the leader. Everything that happens is your fault. You have to look at it in that way. And when I say fault, I don't mean you're to blame. Distinguishing here between blame and fault is very important. Somebody is at fault if they don't do something properly. And if it's your responsibility, then it's your fault if anything goes wrong. If somebody that you've chosen to do a job doesn't do it properly, it's because you've chosen the wrong person, or you haven't given them sufficient training or supervision or quality control. It's your fault. And this is good leadership when you actually know that. It's not that you just behave as though that's true, but you know that. Whatever you're leading is yours, is your responsibility. And if it doesn't go right, it's your responsibility. Responsibility, the ability to respond, is at play here. What we're responding to is feedback. That's what trial and error is all about. We try something out, we do the best we can. That's important. We do the best we can. That means anticipating what can go wrong, making sure that it doesn't go wrong. That's the trial. But then you will make errors, and you have to notice that you have. That's the feedback system in place. So your ability to respond, your responsibility, has to do with having feedback systems in place and using them. Now, the two functions of a feedback system is to indicate that something needs to be corrected because it's not working on the one hand, or an opportunity needs to be grasped because it's open, the window of opportunity is open to you. Both of those are your responsibility. Not enough just to make sure you don't make mistakes. Not enough. You have to make mistakes, actually, and then correct them. And you have to notice opportunities and grasp them. So the leader is having to put in place and use a feedback system. What that means is data, information, facts and figures, opinions, feedback during meetings, consultations. There's a lot to take into account here. And most of this is actually in place in the corporate sector. There are usually feedback systems in place. But interestingly, they're not used. Knowledge management is one of the weakest areas in most businesses. They know they make a mistake, they identify the mistake, and then they don't actually change things to make sure they don't make the same mistake again. Not fully anyway, typically. It's because things get so complex. Most situations are so complex that the leader just gets overwhelmed. And that which is immediately ditched is knowledge management. So, responsibility is one of the 4 keywords for the word sorry in the 7-word system. And we take responsibility for all that happens, and we have the ability to respond. Now, next we come to rectification. If we've done something wrong, we have to make it right. So rectification or repair. We have to fix things. And this is not going to be possible without knowledge management. You have to identify why it went wrong. Either the assumptions were wrong, the data was wrong, the operators were not trained properly. Find out actually why things didn't work. Really, you have to analyze this and come up with a definitive, objective sense of it. Now, let's take this to a more personal level. If you're leading some situation which is basically not very serious, it still applies. You might say, let's all go out to the park. And you go out to the park and you notice that one of your family members is not having a good time and they're really getting quite resentful about it. How did that happen? Well, it happened because when you said, let's all go out to the park, you didn't look at the feedback. The feedback's there. As soon as you make a suggestion and put an idea into someone's head, they respond. And if they don't respond by speaking up and saying, no, I don't want to go to the park, that's not the end of the question. Their facial muscles change involuntarily. Their speech indicates their point of view. There's plenty of feedback. And if you're not looking for it, there's not a very good chance that you'll notice it. You have to look for it. So whatever you propose, you have to notice whether or not it's met with approval, and then it begins to work. Because if you notice early on that something's not right, then you can correct it early on. And that means much less wastage of energy because you're going in the wrong direction. You correct it early. And equally, it takes a lot less effort to put yourself back on track. So noticing feedback earlier is what enables you to make things right as soon as possible. So the third keyword for sorry in the 7-word system, so the third thing we have to take into account is whether or not our compensation is actually sufficient. So if you've done something wrong, usually somebody has got a complaint against you, and that's the most frequent feedback. Your response to that is to compensate them. Say, yep, it was my responsibility. I made a mistake. I've corrected the mistake now. What compensation must I pay? Now, the compensation that you must pay is exactly that amount that dissolves resentment. Anything other than that, too much, you're wasting money, too little, you've not dealt with a problem. So if you've done something wrong, you've hurt somebody's feelings, or you've damaged their property, or whatever, because your responsibilities were not properly attended to, then you owe them something. And that rectification will occur if you compensate them fairly for what their perceived damage is. Now, you're not going to see it the same way that they are, ever. So it's not enough just for you to say, there it is, that's how much damage I caused, I'll compensate you for that. If they're not happy, you haven't done it, because feelings are an aspect of the reality that you're dealing with. And if somebody feels unhappy, then you haven't dealt with it. So finally, you have to actually check, before you can release a problem and move on, you have to check with that person that everything's okay. And this requires a very subtle level of communication. Now, all of this can be done objectively. You can collect facts and figures and documents and letters and so on, and the corporate sector deals with it in that way. But a true leader will actually go beyond that, beyond the objective, data-driven measurement system, and just find out whether or not somebody is still motivated towards completing the goal. Because if they're not, then they're probably in the way. Somebody's either on your side or they're a burden against you. There's no real neutrality, not for any sustainable period. So if you actually come across a problem and you've dealt with it the best way you can and it still didn't work, then you've still got the problem to deal with. That might, in some cases, mean a separation or an additional compensation, or you certainly have to talk it through to find out what needs to be done to make things right. And most people will respond to that question. Look, my responsibility, my bad, I did something wrong. What can I do to make you feel enthusiastic about continuing with this project? And they'll like the fact that you've asked. That alone goes a long way to offering compensation. Acknowledgement that it's your fault, an apology, an offer of compensation, and then just check in. Look, is this okay? Are we good? Can we move forward now? Put this behind us? If you get the right answer to that question, then you've done the job. So, sorry. Trial and error life that we're living, we're going to make mistakes. Knowing how to compensate for that is an aspect, a very important aspect of leadership.